Forge, Chapter 56. Each regiment held its own service of thanksgiving after breakfast the next day. Most officers and their ladies had attended with the New Jersey troops, whilst they were now worshipping. Their servants, including Isabel and me, finished the preparations on the pavilion set up along the grand parade and unloaded the tables and chairs, benches and crates that held the dishes, glasses, food, and wine. The officers and ladies arrived just after we had set the benches in the best location for watching the grand review of the troops. They took their places with General and Lady Washington in the center. His Excellency was one of the tallest men I had ever seen, with a calm face not much marred by the smallpox scars on his nose. Lady Washington was so tiny, the top of her head did not even reach his shoulder. They sat close to each other, and sometimes he gazed at her with a tenderness, and she at him in the same manner. "Here they come!" shouted a voice. All eyes looked to the top of the ridge. At the far end of the grand parade, matros touched a flame to the fire hole of a 9-pound cannon. It roared. All of those seated rose to their feet, clapping and calling. Billy Lee, General Washington's manservant, motioned for us serving folk to move away a bit. I knew the names of only a few of the slaves. Malvinia and Lord Stirling's cook, with her bright yellow turban, Shrewsbury, John Lauren's valet, who had been back and forth to York all winter, and Hannah, Isaac, and Jenny, owned by the Washingtons. We nodded politely to one another and turned our attention to the army. 11,000 soldiers in 5 columns marched down the slope onto the grand parade for a review. As the fifes and drums played, a distant voice shouted a command, and the men shifted from the column formation to line. Another shout, and they wheeled in their platoons until they had formed into 2 long lines of more than 5,000 soldiers each. They halted. The Continental Army had starved and froze and survived the winter, stood perfectly still, shoulder to shoulder, on the field of honor in front of their commanding officer. A few companies had been outfitted with buff and blue uniform coats. Most fellows were in rifle dress, long hunting shirts, worn over breeches they buckled at the knee, stockings under their boots and shoes. They all wore hats folded up in 3 places, and every man and every boy was whisker-free, with hair pulled back in a queue. Nearly everyone wore a new or well-repaired cartridge box, hung from a leather strap, and they carried muskets that had been freshly oiled. All of the muskets had bayonets secured in place under the muzzles. I thought to myself, "Huzzah, General Greene! Well done, good sir!" For he had indeed pulled the matter of supplying the army out of the fires of disaster. Someone shouted a command at the far end of the field. The entire line of 13 cannons fired at once. All of the ladies and most of the serving folk covered their ears at the sound, but before there was even a moment for them to shriek or laugh, the running fire of shots started. This was a feu de joie. I heard a mention of it while serving, French words that seemed to mean make a loud ruckus in a coordinated and impressive manner. The first man standing closest to the cannons lifted his musket shot, a half heartbeat. After him, the fellow to his left shot, and then the next and next, one by one, 5,000 fellows lifting their muskets and firing and reloading, all the way to the last man in the front line. After he shot, the fellow behind him fired, and one by one, in perfect order, 5,000 soldiers in the back executed their task, musket to shoulder, barrel raised, trigger pulled, and the shots roared along the rear line, left to right. When the last gun was fired, the soldiers shouted in one voice, "Huzzah! Long live the King of France!" The cannons fired. Another 13-gun salute. The army responded with a second round of running fire, right to left along the first line, left to right along the second. When the last gun was fired, the soldiers again shouted in one voice, "Long live the friendly European powers!" And to my astonishment, the 13 cannons roared a third time, and a third wave of running fire unfolded with proud precision. The field was clouded with thick smoke. None of the guns had been loaded with a musket ball or a grape shot, but every man had used his full complement of gunpowder. Uh, as each man shot this third time, he did not reload the weapon, but stood at parade rest. After the last gun fired, there came some of the loudest shouts of all. "Huzzah for the American States!" The rest of the serving folk walked to the pavilion, but Isabel and I lingered. The soldiers stayed on the field long after they were excused from duty, laughing from the delight in the perfect performed ceremony. Sergeants passed among them, sharing the extra rum rations that had been ordered. I rose up on my toes and shaded my eyes to better see the fellows. Isabel tugged on my sleeve. Are you looking for your friends? They've probably already gone back to the hut. You really liked being a soldier, didn't you? I still am a soldier. I enlisted until the end of the war. But they don't want you. You are wrong. I pointed to the officers and congressmen making their way to the pavilion for the feast. Those are the folks that don't want me. What about those fellows? A ruckus group of uh, lads loped out of the smoke shouting, "Huzzah! Huzzah!" at the top of their lungs. The three fellows in front, Ebenezer, Benny, and Faulkner, caught sight of us first and stopped in their tracks, 10 paces away from Isabel and me. Greenlaw stepped forward and yelled, "Fourth New Hampshire, Russell Special Detachment, men of Luke Greenlaw, stand in line." The company of 11 fellows formed two lines with 5 standing in front and 6 in back. Several of the faces were new recruits I'd never met. "Formation!" shouted Greenlaw. "One missing soldier!" "Sir!" shouted the company. The two fellows on the right-hand side of the line, Ebenezer and one of the new lads, stepped sideways, leaving a gap in line big enough for another fellow. "Sir!" they screamed again. Greenlaw spun his heel so that he faced us. He touched the brim of his hat. "This company will always hold a place for you, Private Smith." I bowed. "Wheel right!" Greenlaw shouted. The company returned to the right and marched off, keeping the open place that was mine. For once, I did not mind pouring wine, carrying plates of half-eaten food, and standing by while the gentry ate and laughed and made merry. It didn't bother me to see Isabel ferrying dishes of strawberries and cream cakes from the wagon to the pavilion, not even when she wiped the sweat from her brow with her apron. Our army was ready to go to war, and when the Continental Army marched out of Valley Forge, we would be hidden in the middle of it.